Welcome to the Canadian Expat, where we continue on our journey speaking with Canadians and Canadian organizations abroad so that we might gain a bit of inspiration, obtain some advice, and perhaps hear a few cautionary tales. Today, we go to Hong Kong. This episode is a bit unusual. Normally, we're conducting these conversations over the internet, but we were fortunate enough to get my next guest, Andrew Work, while he's on holidays in Canada from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Andrew, welcome to the Canadian Expat.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.
Delighted to see you here. Now, I'm going to start right off the bat by calling you the superconductor of the Canadian expat and business community in Hong Kong.
All right.
So you're managing director, head of media for Next Change.
Correct.
You're co-founder and CEO of New Work Media, which includes publisher and editor-in-chief of Harbour Times. That's an English trade publication in Hong Kong, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yep.
Focused on policy and politics in Hong Kong.
And Sphere as well, correct?
Yep, I also write Sphere, which is the in-house publication for Chung Kong Hutchison.
Co-founder and director of the Lion Rock Institute.
True.
President of the Canadian Club of Hong Kong.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner to Hong Kong for the World Business Angel Investor Forum.
Yes, sir.
And past executive director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong.
All correct. Yes, sir.
A very busy individual.
I keep myself busy, yeah.
So you've been described as a tank.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
You make things happen.
Sure.
The go-to guy in Hong Kong and China. And having an uncanny knack for meeting people and making great introductions.
I'm grateful to whoever said that.
So if anyone knows how to start and grow a business in Hong Kong, you're it.
Sure. Other people have done it better, but, I've been around for sure.
Clearly. So before we talk about what's on everyone's mind, and that's the current situation in Hong Kong with the riots.
Sure, yeah.
I want to ask, with what's going on and with the apparent reabsorption of Hong Kong into China, are there still opportunities for Canadian businesses?
Yeah, it's, with the political overlay of what's happening now, it's definitely raising questions in people's minds. But the fact of the matter is that right now, Hong Kong unemployment is running at something like under 3% and has been persistently at that level for some time. The economy is still doing incredibly well. There was another, the global bull run in the stock market did not evade Hong Kong. The city still a vibrant financial center. With my day job, we do a lot of work in blockchain and fintech, as well as AI smart cities, and health tech. But the fintech and blockchain is exploding over there. Lots of opportunity. Digital banks just got licensed there finally. And then there's a lot of talk about this integration with what we call the Greater Bay Area, which is kind of the new catchphrase for the 90 million person triangle around Hong Kong, Macau, and up to Guangzhou and surrounding cities in the area, where they're trying to reduce legal transportation and physical barriers to moving people and ideas and businesses around there. And I mean, that's all going on right now. But we will get into the latest happenings in the politics, which could have an impact on it.
Right.
In the medium to long term. We'll still see.
So for Canadians that are looking at Hong Kong as a potential business venture, if you will,
sure,
where do those opportunities lie?
Right. So first of all, Hong Kong's still very much a financial center for all of Asia. And there's talk technically Tokyo and soon Shanghai will have bigger stock markets by market cap, but it doesn't matter because those places serve their national jurisdiction. So if you look at Tokyo, it's all Japanese companies listed on it. People outside of Japan, doesn't really matter, unless you're a technical investor. But if you want to set up a financial business for all of Asia, you have to be in Hong Kong. Of course, Singapore is our rival to the south, but still Hong Kong is the only place to be. That type of financial strength also extends into making it a great place for corporate headquarters. The taxes are still incredibly low by global standards. We only have one level of taxation. So it's not like in Canada where there's federal, provincial, municipal, one level, profits tax only, no GST, no capital gains tax, no tax on interest, no tax on dividends, just profits. That's it. And the same goes for personal taxes. So if you're starting a business in Asia, you want to be based in Hong Kong. Those are two big things, like, an Asia presence, financial center, still lots of opportunities in other areas as well.
So we know that there are about 500,000 Canadians that are in Hong Kong right now?
Yeah, so there's a range because you can't physically count that many. So the work that is done, it's a survey commissioned by the Canadian Consulate. They do with Baptist University and the Asia Pacific Foundation out of Vancouver, who are the ultimate publishers. The low end of the estimates is 300,000 and could be as high as 500,000. So when they conduct the survey, they do a household survey and say, do you have one Canadian living in your household? Based on that number, it's about 300,000. But of course, I've got 4 in mind. If you have one, you probably have more, which gets you into a more reasonable estimate, closer to maybe, say, 500,000.
Which is, regardless of how you slice it, that's a lot of people.
At the low end of the estimates, we are the 16th biggest Canadian city by population. Right up there with Burnaby, for example.
What about Canadian corporations? What sort of businesses are operating in?
Finance is big. We kind of get a better sense of what's big in Hong Kong when we look at other places around Asia and see what are the big companies there. Because what we notice, so for example, in Shanghai, there are companies in the wood, the softwood lumber industry that are exporting to China that are big in Shanghai. We don't really see them in Hong Kong. What we do have in Hong Kong in spades are the big financial institutions. So all the big banks are represented. Manulife is a huge player in Hong Kong, not just as Canadian companies, but generally. And so like when you look I think they're the only company in Hong Kong that has their neon lights on both sides of the harbor, right? Sun Life, also a big player there. They've got big neon signs, been up there since I arrived 23 years ago. And all the Canadian banks are in there. But then also the Canadian Pension Plan has installed themselves in Hong Kong, has a rapidly expanding operation. So the finance are the really, really big ones there.
So it sounds to me, and we just talked about this just prior to the interview, but the Canadian population there, the Canadian companies there, working hard to develop the economy here in Canada. They're making an impact.
Absolutely. So you've got whether it's buying offices for Canadian Tire, but a lot of it is people that are facilitating the export of Canadian products to the greater Asia region out of Hong Kong. So those would be formal arrangements, right? Those are people that their job is to promote Canadian exports. Then there's the education sector, right? So in Hong Kong, there are 3 Canadian accredited schools that are loaded with Canadian teachers, spreading Canadian education, Canadian values. That helps to promote our universities as well. And then the only, say, 5-star private school and boarding school in Macau is an Alberta curriculum school started by a Canadian, run by Canadians, right? The International School in Macau. So you've got those sectors. Of course, the financial sector. I mean, if Manulife has, hundreds of thousands of policies out of Hong Kong, right? There are people back in Canada that have jobs making that happen, right? So that's all important. But I think the part that people don't understand is that there's an informal volunteer effort. So whenever, for example, somebody pops up and says, hey, we've got a trade delegation with the Hong Kong Canada Business Association, which is based across Canada, we've got a delegation of small business owners coming in. They want to export to Asia. They've never done it before. Can you help? And we pull in the Canadian community, Canadian expats. They volunteer their time to meet with those people, help them to make direct connections that could lead to sales, right? To educate them on how to do business, to connect them to business facilitators, like if they need to set up a company or find a trusted accountant. The Canadian community volunteers to show up and help make that happen, right?
This is interesting because we've heard this story all around the world, right? It's Hong Kong, of course, in terms of just the size of it. It makes a huge impact. But we've seen this in Tokyo. We've seen this in Singapore. We've seen it in London, Paris, all over the world. Yeah. It's clear that Canadians are making an impact without living in Canada. Yeah. They're improving the lives of everybody that's here in Canada.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for some people, it's their job. But for a lot of people, it's on a volunteer basis.
Right.
Just when the call goes out, you put your hand up and you do what you can to connect Canadians to business opportunities in Asia. It's just part of what we do. It's expected as a contributing member of the community.
Thanks for what you do.
It's not just me. It's a lot of people on the job that I've got.
So let's get down to what we really want to hear right now, and that's the riots in Hong Kong.
Right.
Now, we've heard, of course, that the impetus for the riots is the introduction or the proposal of a bill that would then allow for the extradition of people from Hong Kong to China.
Yeah.
Is there more to the story that we're not aware of in terms of the reasons why there's...
Yeah, I think when something this big happens, there's the proximate causes, there's the immediate causes of things that are happening right now. But I call it my bonfire theory of bureaucracy and policy. When something is happening, something bigger in the background, people are working on it quite often out of sight of the media. People don't know. It's like taking I was a scout leader for a while at the first Canadian Hong Kong Scout Group. Again, Canadians in Hong Kong, but you take the wood and you build it up and you put your tinder in a certain way such that when you want to start the bonfire and all the kids are ready to go, you don't spend an hour, but you put a spark to it and the whole thing goes up. That happens in policy and bureaucracy where people work on something quietly behind the scenes, and when the spark comes, bam. In Hong Kong, the spark was there was a specific case of a young Hong Kong couple, very young, early 20s. They went to Taiwan. She was pregnant. He murdered her while they were in Taiwan. Came back to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government, now as a result of the way things have worked out, it's quite complicated for another story, but Hong Kong doesn't have extradition treaties with Taiwan, with China, with Macau. So the Hong Kong government pops up and says, oh, here's the opportunity to say we have to resolve the situation whereby dastardly criminals like this can't be exported to Taiwan or, to face trial. We're going to introduce a piece of legislation to allow extradition. It was ready to go. That bonfire had been built. They thought this was the spark, but when they introduced it, the people of Hong Kong said, wait a second, and that includes China, and anybody that China deems to have committed a crime could be on the hook. And people of Hong Kong, they're not that easily fooled, and so they took to the streets en masse. Best estimates were 1 million people for the first large protest, asking for the withdrawal of the bill. The bill was rushed in, little to no consultation, really tiny amount, and it went through first reading almost immediately. And people had a sense that this was just going to be rammed through, and so they took to the streets. And that's where it kicked off. So that's a little bit of a more detailed explanation about where this all comes from. But behind it, of course, is deep-seated unhappiness with the pace of introduction to democracy, which is not going forward. It is going backwards. And so these, and of course, the state of the economy, prospects for young people, they all feed into this. They're all part of the bonfire structure before the spark comes.
Now, we've seen an escalation the last couple of days. We've seen violence. Now, we've spoke a little bit about that this violence could escalate even further.
Yeah.
Right. So a big question that we have, are Canadians in danger? I mean, what about those Canadian businesses that are in Hong Kong? Is there a concern for the Canadian population that's living and thriving in Hong Kong? Yeah,
this is complex. So the one thing you have to understand about the starting point for Hong Kong is that it is one of the safest cities in the world. I mean, there's like Tokyo, Osaka, and Hong Kong. I mean, violent crime is almost unheard of, especially for a city of 7 million people. That's almost the population of, say, Quebec, right? Which is what, 8 and change. Hong Kong's 7 and change. So first of all, fantastically safe city, and people are accustomed to it being a very safe city. So almost any level of violence will, kind of have people, Canadians, we have a good hockey ride, everybody comes, cleans up the next day, it's done for, but this is part of something bigger. And it is intensifying. In particular, we've seen it happen over the last 48 hours. Should people be concerned? Is it impacting people? Number one, given that many Canadians, there's a lot of entrepreneurs in Hong Kong, and I know people, for example, in the restaurant business who had premises inside some of the shopping malls where some of the violent clashes have happened, and they've seen business fall off a cliff. I mean, and I don't mean 20%, I mean down 90% day and takes. Now, whether or not that'll recover in those specific places, probably, but they're definitely taking a hit. When there were events happening in Central, sometimes offices would close, right? A lot of the bigger Canadian institutions are in the Central area. So yeah, there is definitely an impact broadly across Hong Kong. Tourism is down, flights are down, hotel bookings are down, and there are Canadians in all those businesses. So if Hong Kong gets hit, yes, Canadians get hit. Canadians aren't targeted specifically. However, we are starting to see directed personal attacks in the last 48 hours. And one of the most prominent Canadians that has been speaking out, she even went to Geneva to present at the United Nations Human Rights Council, is Denise Ho, who is a famous cantopop singer, bilingual, by which I mean Canadian bilingual, English and French. And she has been very outspoken. Her works are all banned in China because of previous commentary on the political situation there. For people like that have been very visible, there could be repercussions. And I mean, they should, frankly, I'm sure she's taking extra precautions these days to keep herself safe. So, I mean, that's just one example of one very prominent Canadian, but that could spread.
Kind of scary. Are you worried?
I don't really have a high, let me just put it this way. I probably don't worry when I probably should. I've done reporting during Occupy. I got tear gas 3 times in one night. It's not such a big, once you've done it a couple of times, it's not a big deal. And that also goes for protesters in Hong Kong. They're not afraid of it anymore. I mean, and we saw that. We said once, and I just from Occupy experience, I knew that once the police use it a few times, people get used to it. And if they're out there on a regular basis, they're not going to be afraid of it anymore. So am I worried? Not as much as I probably should be. A lot of the media, when they go in, they're wearing their helmets and all these, and I tend not to do that. I'm like, I got a press badge, good enough. Although lately I'm thinking, maybe I might want to get a helmet,
We've seen what China is capable of.
Yeah.
Where does this end?
So, I mean, one of the things that we see, there's a couple of things that I want to mention. So one of the things, the use of the word riot in Hong Kong, that's very contentious because people call it protests and manifestations, although the reason for that is the term riot. If you get convicted of participating in a riot in Hong Kong, that changes your legal status. It goes to criminal charges that will put you at least 10 years in jail. So when people, there's been a lot of debate about earlier on when they had protests and egg throwing protests, and people were like, "Oh, that's a riot." They're like, "No." The protesters were like, "That's not a riot. We didn't hurt anybody. Things, yes, but not people." But clearly the clashes have gone to a whole new level. I think we're deep into riot territory now with some of these things that have happened.
Certainly sounds like it.
Especially with what happened in Yuen Long over the last 36 hours, which is part of Hong Kong where they had the white shirt clashes. So there's that terminology. The second thing is China. There's a lot of debate about who is driving this whole extradition bill in the first place. Did the Hong Kong government come up with this on their own, or are they taking directions from China? Short of a smoking gun from deep within the Chinese government's liaison office in Hong Kong or something from the Hong Kong government, that is going to be hotly debated for a long time. And people say, well, what do you think? I mean, what do I guess? What would be my estimation? Nobody really knows how hard China's driving this. But what we know is that the PLA have stayed in their barracks thus far. It's been the Hong Kong police that have been managing this. But I think the interesting distinction is where Hong Kong stops and China begins. And that goes to a lot of issues in Hong Kong.
Right. We've, of course, saw reports of the Hong Kong police delaying their response to the white shirt actions.
Yep.
Of course, they came back and said, "Oh, we just were waiting for reinforcements."
Sure.
Is that
and we're stretched,
true
and they also were like, and we're very stretched because of what was happening in another part of Hong Kong where we knew the protests were going to be on Hong Kong Island. Kind of putting the blame a little bit on the protesters. If you guys weren't creating all this trouble and stretching our resources, maybe we could have. They were kind of hinting that maybe they could have reacted faster. I don't think that's going to wash with people that are already angry with them.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of concern on that front. But what we are seeing over the last 24 hours, in particular, statements made by the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce. They're first among equal of the big chambers in Hong Kong, and they have essentially asked for the same things that the protesters are asking for. Complete withdrawal of this bill, which, as I said, is past first reading. It is now in abeyance, but it could go to second reading and third reading on very short notice. And so that's why people want to completely withdraw, and so it would have to be started over again. So the General Chamber is asking for the withdrawal of the bill. They are asking for accountability among senior members of the Executive Council, which is essentially the same as saying heads must roll, which is what the protesters have been asking for. The Chief Executive said roll. And also for an independent inquiry. And the government has been resisting this. They've been saying, the police's internal procedures of review should be enough. Many more people that are part of the establishment, what we call the pro-establishment, they are breaking ranks to say, no, there must be an independent inquiry. and the new general chamber among them. So I mean, this is a former head of the Supreme Court in Hong Kong has said this. The cracks are becoming more visible.
So it sounds like there may be resolution. There's hope.
I mean, as I said, there's the proximate cause, and then there is the deeper term issues. So on the proximate causes, if they withdraw the bill, yes, that would be a big step forward and would probably take a lot of life out of the peaceful, sensible people protesting. You know, the people that came out in 1 million and then 2 million. Accountability, meaning if heads rolled, key people, the chief executive, the head of security, John Lee, and the secretary for justice, Teresa John. Those are probably the 3 heads that people most want to see go. If they go, that could be another way to diffuse the situation somewhat, and then an independent inquiry as to police and protester action. And I don't think you're going to get an independent inquiry into just the police, because it would ultimately be set up by the administration, and so they would want to include it all, right? So those 3 things would probably be a path to a resolution for now, but it still wouldn't answer the deep-seated questions about democracy and the general pace of democracy, and frustration felt at the economic situation of younger people who, even though they're in a good economy, feel like they're missing out, which maybe is the same as a lot of places in the world.
Right. Andrew, thank you very much for taking your time to come here on your hard-earned holiday with your family. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to be able to share what little I know with people in Canada. I hope it's helpful. They are complex issues, and I hope I made them as succinct and brief and understandable as possible.
It's fantastic.
All right.
Be safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.